Hello, everyone, and welcome to Educative Sessions, a podcast with people in the developer world about their coding experiences. This is brought to you by Educative, which makes it easy for authors to provide interactive and adaptive courses for software developers. My name is Lee Ngo, and I am the host of Educative Sessions. Today, my guest is Brett Greene, who I met through his work with the NewTech Northwest community and is also working on a new company called Epsilon Coaching. And today we really wanted to go deep into a personal issue for him, which is how to lower the overwhelming experience and maximize one's productivity when dealing with ADHD and ADD. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you again. It's been a long time, especially with COVID.
I know it's been too long, and we've done so many fun things together. I sadly am
Oh
beyond the
wait,
age
so
where.
we know, so since this is your podcast
Yes.
and people know you,
Mm.
the fun fact they probably don't know about you is how amazing you do cartwheels.
Oh,
And
I was
and,
about to
we got you to
reluctantly
do
mention that, and
cartwheels a
now.
few different times on stage, and you were always a crowd pleaser.
And the story behind that is when we first met, I was, working a job that was about getting a lot of attention and, preaching very enthusiastically. And I happened to be at a point in life where I was very, very energetic and up that. It's weird. It wasn't that long ago, but I think I've aged terribly since then, and I'm very reluctant to try to do that again. But there was a time where I would try to do cartwheels and just be the greatest hype person I could be in these moments. And it was the best versions of that. What honestly was going to your events, because your events were, actually unequivocally the biggest ones, where everybody was out there and everybody was, making their connections and building their sense of community. I understood almost like synonymously, like when it comes to, say, the Seattle and Puget Sound tech community, as like the first place you go to is NewTech, right? And that's where you go from there. And actually, many people who have been on this show, I have met through this community that you've built.
Awesome.
So thank you. First, let's get all these sycophantic pleasantries out of the way.
No, well, I mean, we're all about what are you up to and how can you help. So, and
Absolutely.
you were always active in the community and helpful and
Mm-hmm.
reaching out to people and there for people. So you were
Yeah.
exactly the kind of person we wanted, and we're thrilled to have in the community. Because the reason the community grew to 60,000 people is because people like you
Mm.
treated it like their neighborhood,
Yeah.
and and that's basically what we ask people to do is like, look, pretend you're at a Saturday barbecue with your neighbors, be cool to other people, be curious about them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you share what you're up to and you're curious about other people, then good things are going to happen for you. Just don't be a salesy schmuck kind of
Mm-hmm.
person that's just focused on what they want. So
Right, right. I mean, definitely something within the culture there that goes to die. And that's it. I completely realize I do this still now whenever I'm doing these kinds of things, engagements. What do you do and how can we help, right?
yeah,
I that's
what are you up to and how can we help?
right. And that's something I've
Or
adopted.
how can I help? If you're just talking to one
Right,
person.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's something I've completely adopted into even the work I've done with Educative. Is like, it's never really about like it's very John F. Kennedy, but like it's still one of his most powerful resonating quotes is that we often ask what the world owes us when we should really just think about what we can potentially owe the world, and it makes for a better. So many different possibilities from there, right?
Oh, it's
Um,
it's fulfilling,
mhm,
and it comes around. And if you're not trying to just do something to get something,
mhm,
and you'll do a lot of things, and then it'll come back from them or other people. And
mhm,
one thing I always in my marketing work brought up with people when they were trying to reach people was, if you picture a target, most people for marketing think about that bullseye. And yes, that's what you should be going for. But the truth is, I've done business development and marketing, for a couple of decades. And the majority of the customers people get and the majority of the clients and the cool people they meet are not that target. They're one or two rings out.
mhm.
And so, I mean, it's good to just be a cool person, right?
Right,
Anyway,
right.
but in business, it's a good way to kind of remind people, like, don't do the salesy, what can I get from you stuff. Because when you're good to people, hopefully it makes you feel better, and it comes back.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, these are like long campaigns, I think, and especially with certain communities. The community that you and I met in Seattle, notorious for being very anti-sales and very like, it's not about, it's a different kind of, let's say, hustle, one could say, but I actually don't even like to use that word when describing what I experienced and what really worked well, which is, I come from an anthropology background, and I was taught long ago the history of what we call now the potluck, but is known as the potlatch amongst Native American communities
Right.
in the Pacific Northwest. And the way that people would show each other up was not about how much you can acquire, it's about how much you can give away in these kinds of things. And the most generous person in the room is the most wealthy in that kind of logic, and the most aspirational. And that's something I've taken to heart, and certainly I've learned through you as well. But today we wanted to talk about something a little different, but I think is going to, I think, elucidate a lot about the way that many people function within these kinds of communities. And it's to talk about, ADD or ADHD. I'm going to have it to you to define these terms as well, because I think it's important to, and to talk as freely as you'd like to about your own experiences, and what it has inspired you into doing something about them.
Um, well, I thought that I had ADHD, or ADD, for a long time. I actually only learned in the last 2 years that they transformed it, I guess, in the 80s, which was kind of shocking
Mm-hmm.
because I always heard ADD. But now it's looked at as a form of ADHD. So what you normally would think of ADHD is generally a boy in an elementary school classroom who can't sit still, can't stay in his chair, and the teacher's trying to figure out what to do with him. And what is known now is that that's one form, but another piece of that is having that hyperactivity going on in your frontal lobe, and it affects your executive function, and it affects your working memory, among other things, but specifically that. So at this point in time, now we know there are a lot of boys and girls, many girls, who were never diagnosed, because you're finding your chair and you're being quiet because you have five things going on in your head at one time,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to suss through that. But what's happening in for someone with ADHD, if we jump from kids to adults, it's really the same thing, is that there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of overwhelm, because executive function is low, which is how many tasks, especially in business, are done. And working memory is low, which is mostly short-term memory. And so it's constantly being aware of what's going on and what other people are expecting. And most ways that an ADHD person would consider normal or the organic way to do something is almost always not the way most people do it. And there's little clues people see. When I was growing up, not knowing this, what I didn't understand was, I remember my mom's fantastic. We had a great house where kids like to come and hang out. But one of the things I remember her saying a few different times is still has stuck with me was, you're such a smart boy. Why do you do so many stupid things? And first of all, not helpful, but she didn't know that back then. But that's the way it looks to other people, because what other people consider just, oh, well, this is the way everybody does this thing, it just doesn't occur. It's just not even on the playing field.
Right.
So you'll say, hey, would you go do this basic thing? And then they'll come back and maybe they did it a different way, or maybe they did it a different way and came up with a different result that's similar. And you're like, what? That's not what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would do things like get on a skateboard like a left-handed person, and then get on a skateboard a right-handed person. And I had no idea until my friends were like, what are you doing?
Right. That's a
Like,
huge shift.
you know,
Right.
right. And I hold a pencil like a left-handed person in my right hand. And people always said, oh, you probably in kindergarten, your teacher probably tried to make you right-handed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have no idea. But
Mm-hmm.
there are these things that just, don't line up. And then,
Mm-hmm.
getting into the working world, There's things that people just assume you kind of have that background and know how to do that thing. And one, you don't, and two, it doesn't occur that way. And three, if you learn how to do it that way, you forget because of working memory.
Right.
So then people are like, well, hey, we talked about this and you said you were going to start doing it this way, but you did it a little bit and now you're back to doing it this other way. Are you like trying to, disrespect my authority or,
Right. It's
and so
like
it
a
shows
quiet mutiny that you're trying to do or something like that,
right.
or like these forms
And
of resistance.
the frustrating irony of the whole thing is it's the exact opposite, that
Mm-hmm.
people with ADHD are constantly all day long trying to make sure they don't screw up in someone else's eyes and guessing how that person's going to see it. And a lot of stuff, just like I said, doesn't come on the radar until the second like it goes wrong and somebody says something, you're like, okay, the stopwatch is going to start again for the next time that's going to happen. And do you want me to keep rambling or go into another
No,
question?
I mean, this is
There's some other things I was
these are great examples to kind of elucidate something. But to add, I'd like to share because when we were setting up this talk, you wanted just or you sent me a link just to see what would happen, and it was a link to actually see where I might fall on the scale of potentially having ADHD. And my results, I think it was like at a scale of 0 to 60, 60 being there's a strong possibility you might. And of course, this is not a fully scientific thing. If I wanted to go diagnose, I should go check it out. I think I scaled at 40. And at the same time, I've got my own things and I'd rather not share. But for the most part, I have struggled a lot with these kinds of things and also found them to be empowering in certain ways as well, and I think we'll get to that in a bit. But all these things you're talking about like, I'm left-handed, but I also do things with my right hand. I am constantly like that thing you just expressed about always playing catch up in my head, but it's a quiet catch up. It's like this strange like stock market floor of just like what are we trying to do here? What's going on? And like just and yet everyone else around me is probably wondering. He seems tense, but he's otherwise doing something because I'm taking up so much energy just to get through the day. And that's what I hope people will understand is that certain minds work in that way. And I've only just recently studied the term like neurodivergence that's come out. And had met with a lot of people who were diagnosed with ADHD who I would describe them as some aspects from an external standpoint. It's actually quite frustrating of having conversations or working together or whatever. But then on the other end of things, like there's some of the most exceptionally performing people that you'll meet, people who are like if they're able to get in that stride or they just have this abundance of just energy and just talent. So I'd love to go a little bit deeper into to maybe the most common misperceptions of people with these conditions, and what would you like to maybe one, I'm sure it's a diverse experience. What is at least like some of the things that you'd like to disabuse from people's perceptions overall?
So if you will grant me doing an ADHD nonlinear thing, can I jump into a couple of statistics to kind of help people and then also answer your question?
Sure.
So like part of what you were talking about is, ADHD people see a lot of connections that other people don't miss, and kind of the reverse of what happens in that case. There's a lot of things that ADHD people think that, or they see and put together, and they think everyone else sees it. And they're like, why can't people see this? Like, yeah, this is where this thing's headed. And this is how it's going to end up, good or bad. And almost 100% of the time, that's how it works out. But then you go talk to non-ADHD people that you work with about it, and they're like, what? Like, and you have to try to communicate to get them to understand it. So one way to look at this is people with ADHD are kind of like people from a foreign country with different cultures, different ways of doing things. And so then when they come to your country, they don't understand all the things you think, well, this is just the way you do it. People would go to Canada and go like, why do they put French fries in mayonnaise? Like, because that's how they do it.
Got it.
and
Got it.
you do it different where you are. So that's one of the biggest things, because you have a faster than normal brain. And one way that the kind of godfather of ADHD described it in I think the first book that ever came out on ADHD, which was Driven to Distraction, which was mostly for kids. It might have been kind of just starting to get into recognizing either adults have it or adults had it as kids and were never diagnosed. Is ADHD is like having I might not paraphrase this perfectly, but basically a Lamborghini brain with bicycle brakes. And so and one way ADHD people operate in the world, the way that we operate in the world, is there's only two speeds in that car. One is now and one is not now. And that's it. And that's all you're present to. So people are like, oh, you're distracted. It's and so the other part is like another big, part of ADHD is hyperfocus. So you give someone a task that they're into, and don't have them in pre-COVID in a room full of 20 people who are all talking, and you've got all these things going on, you can't just go into your thing. They'll deliver better, faster than anyone else who doesn't have ADHD. As far as, when we think about, the tech world is full of entrepreneurs. I've been around startups since 2006. And a big reason is because I'm going to jump back again. I will come back.
No, I'm with you. Go ahead. You're doing fine. Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned a question you didn't ask me that you were going to ask before, that you mentioned about, kind of how I got into startups. And so if I go back, when I was 17, I became a DJ at a community radio station, and not because of me, just really fortunate. It was in Las Vegas in the late 80s when there wasn't much there, and we sold tons of records. And so we were really, it was a top 5 college radio station that was really powerful. And I ended up being the music director and the program director in the next couple of years with that. So along with managing 70 volunteers at the age of 19, I was also running a community that had already been built of people who were inspired and passionate about music. And so, in hindsight now, I can go back and go like, oh yeah, that was when I got a taste of that. I'm like, this is my thing. I love bringing people together to let them find each other and share their things. And they're like, oh, you need to go to this thing or talk to this person or do that. That's probably my deepest passion. And I was never, now I can look back mostly because of ADHD. Career was always a thorn in my side. That radio thing was volunteer. I did earn, college credits once I was a music director, but I did not have that level of fulfillment once I left radio and I worked at record labels, and I got into the business of the music, which wasn't the same as turning people on to a song that changes their life. And so that, for a long time, I did what I could at work, but I had lots of issues, especially with ADHD, and not knowing that, and not knowing why, things didn't work, and things that seemed simple were hard for me. And, when was somebody going to get upset with what I did or didn't do? And in 2006, I had moved to Boulder, Colorado. So I just happened to be there when startup became a thing.
Right.
When that's basically when the word startup arrived, was around 2004, 2006. So I just happened to be, luckily, in Boulder, Colorado when NewTech started there, from a guy who had gone to the original one in New York. And Techstars started. And, at the time, Y Combinator and Techstars were the only 2 incubators in the country, which people probably can't imagine at this point.
Right.
And I went to a NewTech event, and I met all these guys who were 10, 15 years younger than me, that were like living 4 to 5 in a place to pay rent. And they woke up and had to code to change the world. And they were just on fire. And I was like, oh, this is punk rock again. I was like, I haven't had this feeling since, 1992 or something.
Right.
And and it was punk rock back then. It wasn't, hey, Facebook, there was no Facebook. So there was Facebook had just barely started,
Right.
but there was no, hey, it's a gold mine, let me go in and I'm going to make all this money.
Mm-hmm.
The only people who were there in 2006 were people who enjoyed coding. They were generally kind of the misfits, just like the punk rock crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And they woke up with this fire in their belly and had to do things. I'm like, I don't know what these guys are talking about when they talk code. All I know is when I hang out with them and I walk away, I'm high. I feel so great.
Right. Sure.
And I don't have those conversations anymore. And it's so great to be around people who are inspired and turned on by what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how the startup community for me was a punk rock community all
Mm-hmm.
over again.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, when I moved to Seattle, nobody had started it here. And
Mm-hmm.
I connected with Red Russick, who is basically the concierge of the startup community and was doing some stuff with Techstars. And,
Mm-hmm.
Together we launched it, and we had 250 people at our first event. We had 350 people at our second event. And after that, every month at the peak, we had 500 a month just in the Seattle event before we added other cities.
Yeah.
I
big shout out to Red Rusak, and I just want to say, because I grew up, this is such a dorky thing to mention, and this has nothing to do with anything, I'm sad to say, but I grew up as a kid watching the PBS show, The Red Greene Show, and I don't know why, but it deeply connected with me for no apparent reason. It has nothing to do with my background or culture, but I just thought it was a funny show. And then when the two of you show up, as Red Rusak and Brett Greene, or Red Greene, I was like, oh, this speaks to me.
That was Red. Yeah, he went with the Red Greene thing.
But I wanted to kind of tie in a little bit more.
Can I go back to your question?
Sure. I think we're going to the same place. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry I went back to the history, but
I talked about a PBS show. It's okay in the podcast format. It's fine.
It makes it more fun. Jump around.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So statistically, people with ADHD are 300 times more likely to be an entrepreneur because of a lot of things we've already talked about. 72% of startup founders have a mental illness, which you could even just say like depression or anxiety or some other things. 29% of those have ADHD. So basically, let's just say 30% of entrepreneurs have ADHD, which is, and they can be really successful because they see all these great things, but they can fail because they need other support and they need to know what support is. I mean, if I had one thing to tell any ADHD entrepreneur to do, or somebody who's kind of a leader at their work or a manager, the number one thing to do is get an executive assistant or a virtual assistant who's amazing at organizing and amazing at the things you're not good at, and can kind of be your translator, like we talked before about, like it's kind of like coming from two different countries, two different worlds. So somebody who can kind of understand what you're putting out, and then they can put that in a way that other people like it, and then they can make the decks that look pretty, and they can put it in a list that people understand, because we're not good at that. And when you ask us to do that, we take 10 times as long to do it, and it sucks. And it's just a waste of time. So if I had anything to tell people, who hire or who manage people, it would be to be on the lookout for people who have ADHD, to understand what the superpowers are and the kryptonite is, and don't ask them to do the kryptonite stuff. So even if the job description says you have to do these 10 things, if 4 of those things are things ADHD people are not good at, give them a partner that can do those 4 things, and let the ADHD person verbally tell them what's going on, and then let them put it in the package to give to other people. So, just one last statistic to try to understand where, how this is for ADHD folks is, when we wake up in the morning, we have 20% of the executive function of quote unquote normal people, or atypical brains. And when you wake up in the morning, you have your executive function. And as you do tasks through the day, that goes down. It does not replenish until you go back to sleep. So, if you started with 100 and I started with 20 at, 7 a.m., by 10 or 11 in the morning, I'm out. And then now I'm just hustling to like not look bad, or depending on your job, how much freedom you have, you could hopefully arrange your day in ways that work for you. So, okay, I need to do these kind of calls at this time of day, because that's where my brain's going to really be good with that.
Right.
And this is the time of day when I need to be doing brainstorming for almost everybody, even non-ADHD. That's usually, like 1 to 4 in the afternoon is brainstorming. And in the morning, it's analytical.
Yeah.
So tip for salespeople, make your sales calls in the afternoon, because if you make them in the morning, people are going to poke at you and they're going to get over analytical. So all of this to go back to your question about the perceptions, the negative perception is that someone with ADHD is distracted, that they don't care, they're lazy because you see them avoiding tasks. But these are tasks that require a normal level of executive function and a normal level, when I say normal, I just mean atypical level of working memory skills. But on the flip side, the huge asset, which you kind of alluded to earlier, Lee, is if you hire someone with ADHD and you will give them kind of special dispensations, like I was talking about a minute ago, offload the tasks that they know they're not good at, then you have somebody who is going to just solve problems that you didn't even know were there before they show up. Mm-hmm. ADHD people they're amazing at solving problems, working in unstructured environments. So you can kind of go with the flow of where your brain's at. Starting new projects, not great at maintaining, not great at the end, but amazing at getting things launched and cutting through, things that don't need to be there to get it done better and faster. And the downside for an ADHD founder is a lot of times saying yes to everything and just thinking the world needs this. How hard can it be? Let's go do it, without actually being able to totally see where that might go. Right. And ADHD people can overextend themselves, underestimate how much time and energy things are going to take. As I mentioned before, put off some daunting tasks because you're not going to do it well, and it's going to be a drag to do it. And having trouble communicating with people, especially bosses, founders, partners, co-founders that have an atypical brain when you're trying to communicate from a neurodivergent brain.
Right. Wow. That's very helpful, I think. And I really appreciate how, this is probably for anyone else that's listening that might be either wondering or certainly know of themselves to have ADHD. This is probably at least reaffirming in a lot of ways. And I think the most important thing of all is whether you do or don't have it, is to really understand yourself. I find your suggestions about finding people that balance you and are strong where you might not be as strong, because there's clearly, when it comes to a lot of people, and I think why the word neurodivergent is certainly applicable, it speaks to the fact that there are absolute strengths that are almost nearly commonplace in the space of entrepreneurship. One other point I wanted to mention was that there's, for a long time now, for a lot of people, people start to open up a lot about their mental issues while working in entrepreneurship, and the structure of the environment doesn't exactly help when we're talking about like all-nighters and burned to the metal and all that. But now it's funny, not even funny to me, it's actually revealing to me that why aren't these conversations even happening prior to, like, the discussions around like mental health and mental understandings should happen a priori to jumping into endeavors, and both as a consideration as to why one is inclined to do these kinds of things, but as also an earnest conversation around like doing it in a way that's healthy and productive. And also, I think one thing, I mean, we won't have time to discuss in full, is like a lot of relationships do get involved when it comes to entrepreneurship and technology, and having an understanding across the board, I think, will do tremendous, wonderful things for people. Brett, we've come to the end of at least the questions that I had for you. In a weird way, we've answered them in like parts here and there. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the work that you've done in this community, and also this a more recent endeavor that you're doing within the space of supporting people with ADHD. The floor is yours.
Okay, I don't know where to start. So
we can start. I mean,
if you, just so yeah. So I And I'm an executive coach, not just for folks with ADHD, but I do specialize with leaders, entrepreneurs, executives who have ADHD, ADD, or introverts, which is another thing we're not talking about today, but another similar, circumstance. Specifically, tech leaders and entrepreneurs, I do a lot of work with because that's my community. And with my ADHD brain, I built a 60,000 member technology community in Seattle. We've done a lot of, and besides just having where we meet and stuff, we've done a lot of stuff working with the homeless, and we've been doing women in tech and diversity in tech events since 2013, our first year, because that's the world we want to live in. And I think that's an important thing to mention too, is just to have that support for other people, whatever that is. Along with so my executive coaching company I built with my wife, and we've also had marketing companies together, and we actually still do some marketing work. She focuses on women in business and nonprofits and career coaching. So if you go to our website, surely we'll put up there, epsiloncoaching.com, you can kind of learn more about that. The NewTech Northwest community is amazing, fantastic, and we're in our 9th year, and keeps evolving.
That's incredible. 9 years
through COVID times. So
wow.
yeah, so you can also check out that website to see more of what's happening there. And one thing you had asked me about, Lee, that I took some notes, so I just want to mention these to help people. So you're asking me, so professional recommendations for folks. So one, I would say, if you think you have, well, let me jump back real quick to what Lee just said. I think whether you have ADHD or not, it is a really good thing to just track your time. And even if you did it for just one day or 1 week, to just, don't share it with anybody, but you keep track of like, okay, this is how I honestly spend my time. This is, because then you're going to see what you like to do, what you want to do, and you'll get more of those done. And rather than the have-tos, and you'll see what you're putting off that you could maybe offload to a VA or somebody else that could help you out. If you do have ADHD, or you think you might, definitely, get a diagnosis. Like Lee said, there's free tests online you can kind of check before. Trying to get one from your either a psychiatrist or general practitioners. Generally, doctors have therapists who might not be able to prescribe medication, but can do a diagnosis, because they specify that. So your general practitioner might work with a therapist that could help you with that. For organization, get a planner pad. I think it might be plannerpad.com. And don't put it in Amazon, because you're going to see all these other pads that are not that, but it works because of the way it's laid out for an ADHD brain. I mentioned, the virtual assistant, and there are some great ADHD groups. You can probably just Google and find them, but add.org is great. CHADD.org, which is CHADD.org, and Attitude Magazine, which is ADDITUDEMAG.com. And whether you are married or not, go look at ADHDmarriage.com, because you probably are in or would like to be in a relationship. So whatever we say about business, which is relationships, personal relationships, heavily affected by ADHD too. So go to ADHDmarriage.com, and there's tons of things from, there's tons of information there, not only from them, but even just reading the comments to understand people who have ADHD and they're with someone who doesn't, both of them going like, this is what's horrible, this is what's great, this is how we fixed it. And it can also make you feel like you're not alone. So you can understand that other people go through these things that are going on in your head, and you don't realize there's other people there. There's also a fantastic book called ADD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life, and an ADHD Effect on Marriage. There's other things out there, but I would say that's like plenty to dive into that could, at the very least, give you 5 or 10 things that would really be valuable in moving your life forward.
Yeah. as always with you, Brett, it's never just a simple plug. It's always just, I want you to have all the resources, whether it's mine or yours. But that's like so quintessential you, though. It's like, you are here to be as helpful as possible. And, entire communities and monuments are built because of you. And at the same time, I've really been grateful of this session because I've always had this and I still do have a huge deference to who you are and who you've been in the community, but your willingness to speak about something that's so vulnerable and is and in such a way that it's hopefully going to be helpful to other people as well means a lot to me personally as well as to us at Educative. So Brett Greene, I want to thank you so much for being on Educative Sessions. Really appreciate you.
I just thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much too. Because you invited me and give me the platform to share with people. If it's helpful for one person, that's awesome. Besides, it's just awesome to see you again. Yeah. But yeah, thank you, because it's a pleasure, and I appreciate you even being open to the topic, because it's not a direct topic of what Educative is about. Although there's undoubtedly folks in the educated community that are having these experiences.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. And that's that's been a wonderful thesis of this whole sessions is like, yes, look, us at Educative, we've got coding covered. I'm really interested in the humanity of it all, and things like this have to be relevant to this. So I want to thank certainly once again Brett Greene for being on our show. I want to thank you all for either listening or watching this episode. You can check out more of our content on YouTube or on Spotify or on any other major podcasting apps. And lastly, if you want to know what we do at Educative, please look us up at educative.io. So for all of us here at Educative, thank you so much and happy learning. Bye-bye now. Hi there. Hope you enjoyed this Educative session. Be sure to check out more on YouTube or on any podcasting app. And be sure to like this episode and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Happy learning.